Now we're going to transition into the 3508 EZ form. So if your loan amount is over $150,000, you have to make a determination if you can use this form or if you have to use the 3508 form. All right. So remember that I referred to prior. You have this easy form and you have to comply with one or the other of the two statement sets that are here. So if you can say that the borrower did not reduce the annual salary or hourly wages of any employee by more than 25% during the covered period compared to the most recent full quarter before the covered period, you can mark that box and it's a yes. But you also have to be able to say that the borrower did not reduce the number of employees or the average paid hours of employees between January 1, 2020 and the end of your covered period. Okay, here's the thing. As far as the average paid hours, there are two exceptions on this form that you can ignore reductions for. One is if you had someone self-terminate or you terminated them and you posted their job, but you were unable to hire someone who is similarly qualified for the position, all right, within the time frame noted here. Or you offered to restore one of your employees' positions and the hours and they refused, then those employee reductions do not count against you in terms of this compliance item. You do have to document that though, and have documentation in the event you're audited. Okay, so that's one statement set. If you can say yes to both of those statements, then you mark the first box and you can use this form. However, if you can't, then you drop down to the second two statements. And the first one, again, has to do with the annual salary or hourly wage compliance. But the second one has to do with the fact that the borrower was unable to operate during the covered period at the same level of business activity as before February 15th, 2020, due to compliance with the requirements established or guidance issued, specifically between March 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2020, or for a PPP loan that was made after 12/27/2020, requirements established or guidance issued between March 1st, 2020 and the last day of your covered period. That guidance would be issued by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or OSHA. And what's not stated here, but as I said earlier, if you have guidance or requirements issued by your governor that impacted your business, again, all of this is directly or indirectly, and it impacted your business in terms of same level of business activity, then you can comply with this item. And again, if you answered yes to both of those statements, you can mark box number 2 and use this form. Next slide, please. So what does the form look like? Well, again, as I indicated, it has the same information at the top as the 3508S form. Next slide, please. All of that is the same thing I told you before. However, your application process for the dollar amounts on your use of proceeds is now changing. So what's listed here is first and foremost your payroll costs on line 1. You put your employees and employers' payroll costs as designated as being eligible on line 1. Again, payroll costs for line 1 include everything that is eligible. All the cash compensation methods, the state and local taxes, the employer paid retirement funds, the employer paid group health insurances, and all of that, that is all on line 1. And then line 2 is the business mortgage interest expense payments. That really is a little bit of a misnomer, but what it is if you had a secured business loan in place on or before February 15th, 2020, and you were required to make payments which included interest, and you paid them, not the SBA, but you paid them out of pocket, that interest expense is includable on line 2. Line 3 is rent or lease payments. So that includes your facility lease payments during your covered period, and it also includes your equipment lease payments. All right. And those lease agreements needed to be in place on or before February 15th, 2020. And I'm going to say there is, as of what I heard today, some allowance if you had to change your location as a result of all of this COVID stuff. Those lease payments may be allowed as well. Okay. Line 4 is utility payments. There are very specific utility payments that are allowed for inclusion. Garbage and sewer are not among them. So it's water, telephone, your transportation costs, which are actually defined as the fuel expense for your business vehicles. Your internet fees monthly are includable in there as well. So please take a look at the definition of utilities and only include those that are allowed there. And that again is utility payments that were billed and paid during your covered period. Line 5 is this new thing called your covered operations expenditures. And remember, that's the monthly fee that you would pay to a service that's helping you manage your day-to-day operations, whether that's related to accounting or human resource management or inventory control. So it's that monthly fee. All right. Line 6, again, I pointed out the property damage costs. If you were in an area where there was civil unrest and your property was damaged and you had to improve it, restore it, it's your out-of-pocket cost to do that only, not the insurance or other sources. Line 7 is your covered supplier costs. If you had a supplier agreement that was in place on or before February 15th, 2020, and then COVID hit and you couldn't make the payment, you could use the PPP proceeds to honor those obligations. Okay. Line 8 is again a new one. This one is a covered worker protection expenditures. So that includes not only the personal protection equipment for your employees, but if you had to put up barriers or make any kind of modifications to their work environment to get them back in safely working with COVID going on, those expenditures are includable here. So now what you do to determine your potential forgiveness amounts is on line 9, you're adding up all of the expenses that you paid compliant with lines 1 through 8. That's one total. Line 10 is your PPP loan amount. Line 11 is 60% of line 1. 60% of your, 60% of your expenditures for payroll costs. So this is really a confusing one. And what it's really designed to do is to let the lender or reviewer know that if you did not spend at least 60% of your proceeds from the PPP loan on payroll, you cannot have full forgiveness of your PPP loan. So the way you would determine your maximum allowed amount is by taking line 1, your payroll costs, and dividing it by 60%. That will then give you your maximum allowed amount for forgiveness under this loan. So then you drop down to line 12 and you take the smallest of lines 9, 10, or 11, and that is your forgiveness amount you're requesting. Next slide, please. Do we have any questions out there? I'm not seeing any in the Q&A, so.
Not just yet, no.
Okay, all right.
I have one for you at the end just to make sure.
Okay. Now, when you go to page 2 of this application, what you see is all of your representations and certifications. Again, you're initialing every single line as being true and correct. All right. Next slide, please. At the bottom of this page 2, I want to point out that the last 2 certifications, you only have to initial one. Why is that? Because you are initialing the statement set that you said qualified you to do this form. All right. So you only have to initial one or the other, whichever statement set you used for eligibility or to qualify to use this form. That's the only one you have to initial. All right. The other thing I do want to point out is there is a page 3 here, but that all that is your signature block with your print your name, the date of the application, and the title of the authorized signer.